the secret weapon that saved Christianity for 800 years when liquid flame changed history forever. If this fails, Christianity's greatest fortress will crumble, a fire that burns on water itself. This wasn't a fleet, this was a floating nation. The result? A jet of liquid fire that could reach 15 to 20 meters. Within minutes, that ship was an inferno. The naval blockade, the key to the entire siege strategy, had failed in a single afternoon. The winter of 717-718 was one of the coldest in Byzantine records. Greek fire was that weapon. 15th August, 717 AD. On the walls of Constantinople, a man stands watching the heaviest night of his life unfold. Emperor Leo III, crowned just months ago, now faces a sight that will haunt his dreams forever. The Umayyad Caliphate's army, 120,000 strong, has surrounded the city. Double siege walls rise from the earth, but the real threat is still waiting. Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, the caliph's brother, has come with a promise. Either Constantinople falls, or my corpse returns. And Leo. He holds a secret weapon whose formula only 4 men alive know. A fire that burns on water itself. If this fails, Christianity's greatest fortress will crumble. Picture this, your city, ringed by the world's mightiest walls. The triple Theodosian walls, unbroken for 300 years. But you only have 3 years of food. Outside, 120,000 enemies wait. You command perhaps 15,000 defenders. This isn't just another siege. For 80 years, the Arab Caliphate has been winning everything. Persia, crushed. Egypt, Syria, North Africa, taken. Spain has fallen. India is being invaded. This isn't an army, it's a tsunami. But here's what the chronicles barely whisper. Leo wasn't supposed to survive this. He seized the throne in March through political maneuvering. Half the empire questions his legitimacy. One major defeat and internal rivals will tear him apart. Yet facing him stands Maslama, conqueror of fortresses from Armenia to Azerbaijan, a prince who has never tasted defeat. And he's brought not just an army. He's brought 1,800 vessels, supply ships, transports, war galleys, the largest fleet ever assembled against Constantinople. The mathematics are simple. The Byzantines are outnumbered, outgunned, outsupplied. On paper, this siege should be over in months. The Arab preparation had been meticulous. For 2 years, Caliph Suleiman had been assembling this force. Not just soldiers, an entire civilization on the move. The fleet alone carried supplies for 3 years. 12,000 camels, 6,000 donkeys, 30,000 volunteers for holy war, siege engines, mountains of grain. They'd even brought wheat to plant and harvest the following year. This wasn't a raid. This was meant to be the final blow. Maslama had spent 716 devastating Byzantine Asia Minor. City after city fell or surrendered. Sardis, sacked. Pergamon, burned. The Byzantine frontier defense system was collapsing like dominoes. And the timing? Perfect. The Byzantine Empire was tearing itself apart. In just 2 years, 3 different emperors had seized the throne through violence. The army was divided. The themes, military districts, were fighting each other. Leo himself had played a dangerous game. He'd negotiated with Maslama, pretending to be an ally while seizing the throne. The Arabs thought they had an inside man. They were wrong. But now Leo faced the consequences. The Theodosian walls were mighty, yes. Triple-layered stone and brick, towers every 55 meters, a moat 20 meters wide. Attackers had broken against these walls for 3 centuries. But walls don't win sieges, food does. And Maslama knew it. He didn't need to break the walls. He just needed to wait, starve them out. The Arab strategy was simple. Total blockade, by land and by sea. Cut every supply line. Watch Constantinople die slowly. Maslama's confidence bordered on certainty. His force was the elite Ahl al-Sham, the people of Syria, veterans who had conquered an empire stretching from Spain to Central Asia. These weren't conscripts, these were professional holy warriors. His lieutenants included the finest commanders of the age. Umar ibn Hubayra, admiral of the fleet. Suleiman ibn Mu'ad, who'd led the vanguard through Cilicia. Each man commanded thousands. By mid-July 7017, Maslama's army reached Constantinople's land walls. The Arabs built their double siege wall, one facing the city, one facing outward to prevent relief. Between these walls, a fortified camp, systematic, professional, patient. Arab engineers began constructing siege towers. Catapults were assembled. Naphtha, incendiary material, was stockpiled in massive quantities. They had the resources to sustain this for years. Inside the city, panic rippled through the population. Leo had evacuated everyone who couldn't stockpile 3 years of food. But those who remained now watched the horizon darken with enemy banners. Then came the fleet, September the 1st, 717. The seas were calm, a warm wind from the south, and on the horizon, a sight that turned Byzantine blood to ice. 1,800 sails. This wasn't a fleet. This was a floating nation. War galleys with rams and marines. Transport ships groaning with supplies. The sheer scale defied belief. Some Byzantine observers reported they couldn't see the end of the fleet. It stretched beyond the horizon. The plan was elegant. Sail into the Bosphorus, anchor around Constantinople's sea walls, cut off the Black Sea grain route, complete the Starvation blockade. Then wait. Watch the city die. September 3rd, 717. The Admiral Suleiman gave the order. The fleet began its entry into the Bosphorus Strait. The vanguard, 20 heavy war galleys carrying 2,000 elite marines, led the way. These weren't ordinary ships. They were the pride of the Umayyad navy, built in Syrian shipyards from Lebanese cedar. Each galley bristled with archers and carried boarding equipment. Their mission, reach the sea walls under cover of darkness, scale them using the ship's steering paddles, open the gates from within. It was bold, it was brilliant, and it should have worked. But Leo had a secret. A weapon so devastating, so terrifying, that its very existence was a state secret punishable by death. Greek fire. The formula was known to perhaps 4 men in the entire empire, passed from emperor to emperor in whispered confidence, guarded more closely than the imperial treasury. We still don't know exactly what it was. Modern historians have debated for centuries. The primary ingredient was probably petroleum, crude oil, mixed with resin from pine trees, sulfur, and quicklime. Some speculate saltpeter, others suggest naphthalene. But whatever the exact mixture, its properties were nightmarish. It burned on water. Couldn't be extinguished with water. In fact, water made it spread. It stuck to whatever it touched, ships, sails, flesh, and burned with intense heat. The flames were reportedly greenish and produced thick black smoke. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical damage. The delivery system was equally ingenious. Bronze siphons, tubes mounted on the prows of specialized warships called dromons. Inside the ship, a furnace heated the mixture. Pressure, possibly from pumps operated by bellows, forced the liquid through the heated tube. At the tube's end, it ignited on contact with air or through a pilot flame. The result? A jet of liquid fire that could reach 15 to 20 meters. A flamethrower, 7 centuries before anyone else invented one. Byzantine naval engineers had been perfecting this weapon since 672 AD during the first Arab siege. For 45 years, it had remained their trump card. The Arabs knew it existed. They feared it. But they'd never faced it on this scale. Leo had spent his first months as emperor preparing. While pretending to negotiate with Maslama, he'd been secretly gathering every alchemist who knew the Greek fire formula, converting dozens of dromons into fire ships, training crews in the dangerous art of deploying liquid flame, stockpiling the ingredients in hidden arsenals. The Byzantine fleet wasn't large, perhaps a few dozen dedicated war galleys, but each fire ship was worth 10 ordinary vessels, and Leo had positioned them perfectly. Hidden in the Golden Horn, the natural harbor protected by a massive chain boom, his fleet waited. Crews ready, siphons loaded, furnaces lit. The Byzantines had one advantage the Arabs didn't expect. The Bosphorus itself. The strait's currents are treacherous. Wind patterns shift without warning. Local knowledge matters. On September 3rd, that knowledge became everything. As the Arab vanguard, 20 heavy war galleys, entered the Bosphorus that afternoon, something unexpected happened. The southerly wind that had been pushing them forward suddenly died. Just stopped. The seas went flat. Then the wind reversed, coming from the north. The galleys, their sails now useless, began drifting, not toward their target, toward Constantinople's sea walls, toward the range of the Byzantine fleet. Arab mariners scrambled with oars. But these were Syrian sailors on unfamiliar waters. The Bosphorus currents gripped them. The 20 ships drifted helplessly toward the city. On the walls, Leo saw his moment. A gift from God or geography. It didn't matter. He gave the order. The boom chain dropped. From the Golden Horn emerged the Byzantine navy, not hundreds of ships, perhaps 20-30 dromons, but each one carried death. The bronze siphons angled forward like dragon heads, furnaces roared, and then, whoosh! Streams of liquid fire erupted across the water, greenish-yellow flames arcing through the air. The sound alone was terrifying, a roaring hiss like some ancient beast awakening. The first Arab galley hit by Greek fire didn't sink, it exploded into flame. The liquid splashed across the deck, the sails, the rigging. Men screamed as fire stuck to their skin, burning through cloth and flesh. Some jumped overboard, only to find the flames followed them, spreading across the water's surface. Within minutes, that ship was an inferno. The Byzantines didn't just attack once. The dromons circled, siphons firing in rotation, stream after stream of liquid fire. Arab sailors tried to fight back with arrows, but you can't stop a flame with a bow. One by one, the 20 Arab galleys burned. Some tried to row away. Their oars caught fire. Others attempted to beach themselves, but the fire consumed them before they reached shore. A few captains ordered their marines overboard, hoping to swim to safety. But weighted with armor, most drowned. Those who made it to shore were burned, broken men. Theophanes the Confessor, our primary Byzantine source, records it clinically. Some sank with all hands, others burning drifted to the Prince's Islands. But imagine witnessing it. 20 massive war galleys, carrying 2,000 elite marines, reduced to smoking wrecks in less than an hour. The screams, the smell of burning flesh and wood. The black smoke rising into the sky like a funeral pyre. The rest of the Arab fleet, the hundreds of ships still waiting to enter the Bosphorus, saw everything. The survivors who made it to shore told their stories. The terrified Arab sailors had a new name for the Byzantine weapon: the sea fire, the liquid flame, the devil's weapon. That night, Maslama held a war council. His admirals were shaken. They'd faced arrows before, ramming, boarding actions, but not this, not fire that couldn't be stopped. Admiral Suleiman made his recommendation: withdraw the fleet to Sosthenian, a safe harbor up the European coast. Stay out of range. Wait for winter to break Byzantine morale. It was the smart tactical decision, but it was also surrender. The naval blockade, the key to the entire siege strategy, had failed in a single afternoon. That same night, Leo ordered the great chain raised across the Golden Horn's entrance. Constantinople's harbor was sealed. The Byzantines controlled the sea. The first phase of the siege was over, and against all odds, Leo had won it. But winning one battle doesn't win a siege. Maslama still had 120,000 soldiers surrounding the city, mountains of supplies, time on his side. Or so he thought. September gave way to October. The Arab camp settled into siege routine. Foraging parties swept the Thracian countryside. Guard rotations manned the siege walls. Maslama's engineers continued building siege equipment. Inside Constantinople, life continued with eerie normalcy. Markets operated. Churches held services. Fishermen, now that the Arab fleet had withdrawn, went back to work. Ships from the Black Sea brought grain. The city, against expectations, was being resupplied. But outside, something was going wrong. The Arab army had devastated Thrace during their march to Constantinople. Every field stripped. Every granary emptied. Every animal slaughtered. They'd left nothing for themselves to forage. The fleet withdrawn to Sostinion could bring some supplies from Anatolia, but not enough. Not for 120,000 men. By November, rations were tightening. By December, soldiers were hungry. Then came the winter. The winter of 717–718 was one of the coldest in Byzantine records. Snow fell in October and didn't melt until February. Temperatures plunged below freezing for months. The ground froze solid. The Arab army coming from Syria and Egypt was utterly unprepared. They had summer campaign tents, inadequate clothing, no experience with sustained cold. Men began dying, not from combat, from exposure, frostbite, hypothermia, and the hunger grew worse. The wheat they'd brought to plant, frozen in the ground? The animals? Slaughtered for food within weeks. Arab sources describe the desperation. Soldiers eating their horses, their camels, their donkeys. Then the bark off trees. Then roots dug from frozen earth. Then, worse. Multiple sources, Arab and Byzantine, mention cannibalism. Whether it actually happened or was propaganda, the fact that it's recorded at all tells you how desperate the situation became. Disease followed hunger. With men weakened, packed together, sanitation collapsing, epidemics swept the camp. Dysentery, typhus, possibly plague. The Arab chronicler Al-Tabari records, "They suffered such hunger that they ate their own dung and the flesh of dead men." Paul the Deacon, a Lombard historian, claims 300,000 Arabs died, an impossible exaggeration, but it shows how catastrophic the siege became in medieval memory. Maslama tried to maintain morale, distributed his personal supplies to the troops, executed deserters as examples, promised that relief was coming from Damascus. But inside Constantinople, Leo knew time was on his side now. He just had to wait. Watch the Arab army destroy itself. Still, he took no chances. Byzantine raids hit Arab foraging parties. Propaganda was spread among the besiegers. "Your caliph has abandoned you. Your families think you're dead. Surrender, and we'll spare you." Some Arabs did defect. Christian Arabs especially began slipping into the city. They brought intelligence about the deteriorating conditions in the camp. By February 718, Maslama's mighty army was a shadow of itself. Perhaps 70,000 men remained alive. Most were sick, starving, or both. The siege had become a slow-motion catastrophe, but Maslama was a proud man, and he'd made a promise. He would take Constantinople or die trying. He just needed reinforcements, fresh supplies. And the new caliph, Umar II, was sending both. Spring 718 brought hope to the Arab camp. Ice melted. The siege lines stirred with renewed energy. Because messengers had arrived with news, 2 massive relief fleets were coming. From Egypt, 400 ships under a commander named Sufyan. From North Africa, 360 ships under Izid. Combined, 760 vessels loaded with fresh troops, weapons, and supplies. Plus, a land army was marching through Anatolia to reinforce Maslama. If these forces reached Constantinople, the siege could continue for years. The Byzantines might still starve. Leo knew this was the critical moment. But he also knew something Maslama did not. Most of the Egyptian fleet's crews were Coptic Christians. Arabs had forced them to sail, but their loyalty was flexible. In April 718, the Egyptian fleet entered the Sea of Marmara. They anchored near Nicomedia on the Asian shore, staying carefully out of Byzantine range. But that night, Coptic sailors began rowing small boats across to Constantinople. They brought intelligence, the exact location of both fleets, their strength, and a promise. If the Byzantines attacked, the Christian crews would defect. Leo acted immediately. He assembled his fireship fleet and launched a night attack. The Egyptian fleet, anchored at Tuzla, never stood a chance. As Byzantine dromons approached, the Christian crews aboard Arab ships began jumping overboard, swimming to the Byzantine vessels. Entire galleys were abandoned by their crews. The remaining Arab marines tried to fight, but they were sailors, not soldiers. And Greek fire doesn't care about your training. Stream after stream of liquid flame poured across the Egyptian fleet. Ship after ship exploded into infernos. Some tried to cut anchor and flee, but with no experienced crews, they drifted helplessly. By dawn, 400 Egyptian ships had been destroyed or captured. Thousands of Arab marines were dead or captured. The supplies, grain, weapons, siege equipment, were now in Byzantine hands. 3 days later, the African fleet met the same fate. Anchored south of Chalcedon, they watched the smoke from the Egyptian disaster and knew what was coming. Some captains tried to sail away immediately. Others tried to beach their ships. It didn't matter. The Byzantine navy, now reinforced by captured Egyptian vessels, fell upon them with overwhelming force. Greek fire turned the waters into a burning hellscape. The African fleet was annihilated. Combined, the two relief fleets had brought 760 ships. Perhaps 50 survived to limp back to Arab-controlled ports, but Leo wasn't done. Intelligence reported that a land army under a commander named Mardasan was marching through Bithynia to relieve the siege. Byzantine forces, operating from fortified positions in the hills around Sophon near Nicomedia, ambushed them. The Arabs, exhausted from the march, strung out along mountain roads, were caught completely by surprise. The Byzantine cavalry hit them from multiple directions. Arab formations broke. It became a massacre. Mardasan's entire army, perhaps 20,000 men, was destroyed. Only scattered survivors made it back to Syria. In the space of 3 weeks, Umar II had sent 3 massive relief forces. All 3 had been annihilated. The siege was now completely lost. Everyone knew it, except Maslama. He refused to give up.
May 7/18. The Arab camp was a graveyard. Unburied bodies, starving survivors, destroyed morale. Of the 120,000 who'd arrived the previous summer, perhaps 50,000 remained, and most of those were too weak to fight. Maslama still sat in his command tent, planning assaults that would never come. But his soldiers were beyond caring. Desertion was rampant. Units were refusing orders.
The dream of conquering Constantinople had become a nightmare of survival. Then came the Bulgars. Khan Tervel had been watching this siege with great interest. The previous year, he'd signed a treaty with Leo, possibly including a mutual defense clause. Now he saw his opportunity. A Bulgarian army, perhaps 12,000 warriors, swept down from the north into Thrace. They weren't there to besiege Constantinople. They were there to attack the Arabs. The Bulgars were steppe warriors, expert horsemen, masters of the hit-and-run raid, and they found a target-rich environment, starving, sick Arabs trapped between siege walls with nowhere to retreat. The Bulgarian attack was devastating. They struck Arab foraging parties, supply lines, isolated units. The Arabs, weakened by months of starvation, couldn't mount effective resistance. Theophanes records that the Bulgars killed 22,000 Arabs in various engagements. That number may be exaggerated, but it indicates a catastrophic defeat. One major battle occurred when Arab forces, desperately seeking food, wandered into Bulgarian territory. The Bulgars surrounded them and slaughtered them almost to a man. Another Bulgarian force attacked the Arab siege camp directly, causing panic and chaos. Imagine, you're starving, sick, surrounded by hostile territory, your relief fleets are destroyed, and now a completely fresh enemy army is attacking your rear. The psychological impact was total. The siege was over. In Damascus, Caliph Umar II finally accepted reality. He sent orders to Maslama: abandon the siege, return home, save whatever forces you can. On August 15th, 718, exactly 1 year after the siege began, and on the feast day of the Virgin Mary, the Arabs began their withdrawal. The Byzantines, in a remarkable act of strategic restraint, didn't attack the retreating army. Leo could have ordered his garrison to sally out, catching the Arabs at their most vulnerable. The Bulgars could have continued their harassment. But Leo understood. Let them leave. Attacking might turn retreat into desperate last-stand fighting. Better to let them go and be certain they're gone. The Arab army limped back toward Anatolia, broken, starving, a fraction of its original strength. But their nightmare wasn't over. The Arab fleet, still anchored at Sostinion and other harbors, prepared to sail home. Hundreds of ships remained, the original fleet minus the vessels lost to Greek fire. They set sail in late August, hoping to reach Syrian ports before autumn storms. The Sea of Marmara seemed calm. The weather looked fair. Then the sea itself turned against them. A massive storm, possibly a late-season Mediterranean cyclone, struck the fleet in open water. Winds that could tear sails from masts, waves like mountains, ships that had survived Greek fire were now being crushed by nature. Theophanes records, a great tempest fell upon them. Dozens of ships capsized, hundreds of sailors drowned. The fleet scattered across the sea. Those that survived the storm faced an even stranger fate. The volcano of Santorini, called Thera, far to the south, had recently erupted. Massive amounts of volcanic ash and pumice were floating on the Mediterranean's surface, thick enough in places to look like land. Arab ships sailed into these ash fields and couldn't escape. The ash clogged oars, fouled rigging, and most horrifically, some sources claim the ash was still hot enough to ignite wooden hulls. Whether from heat or simply being trapped, many ships caught fire. Sailors watched their vessels burn, far from any shore, with no hope of rescue. A few Arab captains, panicking, tried to beach their ships on Byzantine-controlled coasts. Byzantine garrisons captured these vessels and their crews. By the time the surviving Arab ships limped back to Syrian ports, the fleet had been virtually annihilated. Theophanes, with perhaps some exaggeration, claims only 5 ships made it home. Modern historians think perhaps 10–15% of the fleet survived. Still, of 800 vessels that had set sail with such confidence, barely 200 returned. Arab sources record the total casualties of the entire campaign, 150,000 dead. That number is almost certainly inflated. Medieval chroniclers loved big numbers. But even if we cut it in half, we're looking at 75,000 deaths, from starvation, disease, combat, drowning, and burning. One of the greatest disasters in medieval military history. The siege's failure sent shockwaves through the Islamic world. The Umayyad Caliphate had been on an 80-year winning streak, conquest after conquest, the greatest empire since Rome. Now, they'd lost an entire army and fleet. The cream of Syrian military might, gone. The financial impact was catastrophic. Outfitting 120,000 soldiers and 1,800 ships had drained the treasury. The loss of men meant lost tax revenue, lost military capability. Umayyad power was suddenly finite. Caliph Umar II reportedly considered radical options, abandoning recent conquests in Spain and Central Asia, withdrawing from Cilicia and all Byzantine territory. Basically, strategic contraction to consolidate what remained. His advisors talked him down from the most extreme measures, but the forward momentum of Islamic expansion had stopped. Dead. The Arab-Byzantine wars would continue for decades, raiding, counter-raiding, border skirmishes. But never again would the Arabs attempt to take Constantinople. Never again would they threaten the Byzantine heartland. The psychological impact was even greater. For 80 years, Arabs had seen themselves as divinely favored, unstoppable. Now, they'd been defeated by a combination of walls, winter, and especially that terrifying Greek fire. Arab chroniclers struggled to explain it. Some blamed Maslama's tactical errors. Others said Leo had tricked them, which was partially true. Some claimed divine intervention, that Allah had tested them and found them wanting. But the quiet truth was simpler. They'd underestimated their enemy. For Byzantium, the victory was transformative. Leo III, who'd seized the throne through political maneuvering, was now a legitimate hero emperor. He'd saved civilization itself. The Byzantine military, which had been in chaos, rallied around him. The themes stopped fighting each other. Internal stability returned. Leo would reign for another 23 years, instituting controversial religious policies, iconoclasm, that would divide the empire. But his military reputation was unassailable. The Bulgars, having proven their value as allies, secured a favorable treaty. Byzantine-Bulgarian relations would be complicated, but this moment marked the beginning of a long strategic partnership. And Greek fire? Its reputation became legendary. For the next 300 years, the mere threat of it would make enemies hesitate. The formula remained secret, passed from emperor to emperor, until eventually, sometime in the late medieval period, it was lost forever. Modern historians still debate what it really was. We can approximate it, but we'll never know for certain. The Byzantines kept their secret too well. So, why does this siege matter? Why is it considered one of history's most decisive battles? Because if Constantinople had fallen in 718, the course of Western civilization changes completely. Think about it. Constantinople was the guardian of Europe's eastern frontier. For 800 years it absorbed wave after wave of invasions: Persians, Avars, Slavs, Arabs, later the Turks. Each time, it held. But it was more than a military fortress. It was the center of Eastern Christianity, the repository of classical knowledge, libraries full of Greek and Roman texts, the wealthiest city in Europe, the trading hub between East and West, the last remnant of the Roman Empire. If it falls in 718, the Umayyad Caliphate controls the Bosphorus. They can invade the Balkans, threaten Italy, move into Central Europe. The Frankish kingdoms in the west, including Charlemagne's future empire, would face invasion from two directions: Spain in the west, the Balkans in the east. Would Christianity have survived? Probably, but it would have been confined to Western Europe, constantly under siege. Would the Renaissance have happened? Unlikely. Much of the classical knowledge that sparked it was preserved in Constantinople. Would Islam have become Europe's dominant religion? Possibly. Historians have compared the siege to other decisive battles: Marathon, Hastings, Tours. This is in that category, a hinge point where history could have swung dramatically different. But here's what's fascinating. It wasn't won by superior numbers, or brilliant generalship, or even divine intervention, though Byzantines believed that. It was won by technology. Greek fire gave Byzantines a decisive naval advantage. Geography, the Theodosian walls and Bosphorus currents. Intelligence, Leo's use of spies and the defection of Christian crews' alliance. The Bulgarian intervention. Logistics, the Arabs failed to maintain supply lines. Weather, the brutal winter and the storms. 7 factors, none of which individually would have been enough. But together, they saved an empire. And here's the beautiful irony. The Arabs lost because they were too confident. They brought supplies for 3 years, siege equipment, massive armies, everything except humility. They assumed Constantinople would fall like every other city had fallen. They forgot that some fortresses don't fall. Some cities are worth dying for, and some weapons are so terrifying that they change the rules of warfare itself. Greek fire was that weapon, not because it was invincible, it had limitations, but because it was unexpected, devastating, and psychologically shattering. Modern militaries still study this siege, not for the specific tactics. Greek fire is long obsolete, but for the principles. Defend from strength the walls, use technology asymmetrically. Greek fire, control key terrain, the Bosphorus. Force the enemy to fight on your terms. Make allies, the Bulgars. Let your enemy's mistakes compound, the Starvation. Leo III didn't win by being more aggressive than Maslama. He won by being smarter, more patient, and by exploiting every advantage he had. August 15th, 718. From the Theodosian walls, Leo III watches the last Arab soldiers disappear over the horizon. The siege is over. Behind him, Constantinople celebrates. Church bells ring. People flood the streets, praising God and the Virgin Mary. Priests proclaim it a miracle. Leo knows better. It wasn't a miracle. It was preparation. It was Greek fire. It was the walls his ancestors built. It was Khan Tervel's opportunistic strike. It was winter and hunger and disease. It was war. But it was also something else. A moment when one man, one city, one secret weapon stood between civilization and collapse. The Arabs would never again threaten Constantinople on this scale. Oh, they'd keep raiding, keep probing. But the era of unstoppable Islamic expansion was over. The frontier stabilized. Christianity survived in the East. Classical knowledge was preserved. The Byzantine Empire would limp on for another 735 years, finally falling in 1453 to the Ottoman Turks. But that's a different story. This story, the story of 717, is about the fire that saved the world. Not with swords or cavalry charges or heroic last stands, but with science, with a liquid flame that burned on water. With a weapon so terrible that its very existence became legend. Greek fire. We've lost the formula, lost the exact knowledge. But we haven't lost the lesson. Sometimes, the difference between victory and annihilation is a secret known to only 4 men. A bronze tube, and the courage to use it. On August 15, 717, 120,000 Arabs besieged Constantinople with 1,800 ships. They brought enough supplies for 3 years, siege equipment, and absolute confidence. 1 year later, barely 50,000 survivors staggered home. Their fleet was destroyed, their army broken, their empire's expansion halted. What stopped them? Walls, winter, allies, intelligence, and fire. Liquid fire. Greek fire. The secret weapon that saved Christianity for 8 centuries, until the secret died with those who knew it, and the weapon passed into legend. Where perhaps it belongs, mysterious, terrifying, and forever burning in the pages of history.